Welcome to the Auros Playbook, a podcast series designed to educate organizations on how to utilize Auros in a way that helps them become more knowledge aware. Knowledge aware is the new approach that transforms the way knowledge is captured, shared, and reused. On today's show, Knowledge Aware and Auros Briefing. So this is the first in our series of basic casts or basic shows where we're going to kind of go over the concepts behind Auros, what it was built upon, and then talk a little bit about how people can accomplish this knowledge-aware approach at their organizations. So for today, Jeff, we have some high-level learning points. Why don't you take us through what those are?
Sure thing. Thanks, Josh. So today we're going to go over the big picture where we'll introduce the fundamental concept of how knowledge-aware works. And then we will go into fundamentals where we'll introduce the core components of the approach of the knowledge packet and the assessment control.
So we're going to talk conceptually about the idea, and then we'll get a little bit into the actual inner workings of the software and how that's accomplished.
Right. I think we'll even throw in a demo.
Sounds good. All right, so why don't we dive right into what we call the big picture?
Cool. So here we are, and let's start over here, the big picture. So with the big picture, we start with why are we interested in knowledge management anyway? So really, the whole idea is based on the concept or the idea that I think most people will appreciate, that the lack of reuse of knowledge, of learning, causes all kinds of problems. So Josh, you talk to customers all the time, and they're always talking about the money they're burning on the plant floor, or the wasted time in product development because they didn't learn a lesson from the past, or new engineers are having a hard time understanding what needs to get done or what needs to be considered.
Yeah, they have a lot of recurring mistakes, so they do something, and then 2 years later, the same thing happens, and like you said, they're burning money on the plant floor is a lot of times what we'll hear.
Yeah, I actually had someone recently say that, so it was top of mind. So this guy here standing on the burning building, and what I want to point out about this picture is that the guy doesn't look concerned. And the funny thing is that we see, especially in engineering and discrete manufacturing type companies, that people are so used to the problems associated with lack of knowledge reuse that they don't seem alarmed by it.
Yeah, it's second nature, right?
But there's a new day dawning, and that's what we're here to talk about. So what I want to say at this point is that I'm a believer that this approach to managing knowledge, the knowledge-aware approach, is in everybody's future. It's inevitable because the technology to change this kind of acceptance of bad performance is at hand. Okay, so what we're really talking about, how do we explain what's so different about it? We like to use a metaphor, and the metaphor is of the map and the transition to navigation. So the map being how people are managing knowledge. Certainly, having a map when you're trying to get from point A to point B in a new place, it's useful, right? But it's not the best way. It's every turn possible. I only need certain turns on that map. The turns are only correct to the time the map was published, which is becoming out of date the second it gets printed, right? This is not the best way. Right now, navigation. Right? And navigation is a better way of getting around. Nobody uses the maps anymore. Right? It's the new approach. It's a better approach. Why? Navigation gives you just what you need when you need it. You have every confidence is giving you the right thing, the right most update information. It's giving you the turn and the map tiles as you need it. It's sensing where you are and providing the information for where you are. Right?
Yeah, where you need to go.
Where you need to go. Right. That's way better than everything possible, right? But I submit there's something far more important happening that's very important to the learning processes in your organization. And that is the navigation tool is collecting data about what you're doing and about what every other driver is doing. So as every other driver passes the right turn that was suggested, it starts to say, hey, we should investigate that right turn. Maybe that's not a turn we should suggest in the future, right?
Yeah, the paper map has no ability.
No ability to do that. So it can use the data about what others are doing to improve the knowledge solution that's being provided, right? And it's also taking that data to create high quality insights like traffic and estimated time to arrival. I use my navigation app almost every day just so I know how long it's going to take me to get somewhere, so I'm not late for a meeting. Useful data, useful insights. And I submit this is far more important to the future of enterprise learning than any of the other aspects. We need a knowledge process that can refine itself and collect data and produce high quality insights.
So I just want to touch on something real quick. So even though you know exactly how to get home, you still use the navigation because it's able to provide you things that your brain cannot provide you.
Precisely.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on. So that's kind of the big picture.
Right. So that makes sense, right? Everybody understands navigation. Paper maps far inferior to the superior technology of the navigation app. But how do we actually accomplish that at our organization where we have all sorts of information in all sorts of places?
Exactly. And you kind of highlighted the problems already. All sorts of information, all sorts of quality, or all sorts of granularity in this silo and that silo, right? And to the end user, that kind of knowledge process looks like this. They don't like it, they won't use it, and they're certainly not going to help the process or contribute some type of learning when they've learned something, because why put something into a void, right? It's just not going to happen. And right, Josh, everybody that we encounter, that we talk to about their existing processes say that's a problem.
Yeah, they struggle with it. And by looks like this, you mean the library approach.
The library approach, right?
Yeah.
If you're using SharePoint, SharePoint's a great tool, but for managing knowledge, not so much. And there's an inherent flaw. And that brings us to the next thing. The new way is to manage knowledge as a unitized granular structure called the knowledge packet, right? And so the flaw in the SharePoint solution is that the conveyance of the knowledge, the learning, is a document. And the document has just inherent limitations that we're going to talk about. And so the first step to moving to the navigation process for knowledge is to manage the knowledge directly in this unitized format that's been readied for reuse in the same way that a knowledge tile, same way as a map tile has been readied to be provisioned based on the context, the GPS location that your cell phone provides. So we're going to do that same kind of thing to units of knowledge so that it's ready to be provisioned as it's needed.
And this point of readied for reuse is something that we'll touch on a number of different times as we go through this, because it's really what allows us to start to change the game of people having to go search for information like the paper map versus delivering it to them directly.
Exactly. And provides the incentive models for people to contribute. So really what we're saying is that the document model goes away, and the bloat and the waste of that process also goes away. And what's left is a far more efficient and powerful process of just managing these unit structures of knowledge called knowledge packets. Now, invariably, I know, this usually scares people. They're like, oh, that's new and that's different. It seems like it would be hard. But in reality, our customer experience is that it's not once a few fundamentals are understood. And we're going to talk about those fundamentals in just a bit.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the leading concerns that people have is how are we going to get all of this information into knowledge packets? And what we actually find is that you don't transform all of that information into knowledge packets. There's a reason people aren't using a lot of it, and it's because it's not accurate, it's not up to date, it's not information that they really need. So when we talk about transforming the way you capture, share, and reuse your knowledge, this is the first step in that process.
Yeah, this process is inherently more efficient than the document-based process. It's probably a little off scope to get into all those reasons today, but maybe in a subsequent cast we can get into that and kind of pull back the sheets a bit and understand the process of capturing knowledge, why this is so much more efficient. I guess people who probably have experience with document bloat will probably understand it without too much explanation, but this is a better process.
Okay, so I want to manage my knowledge directly. Why do I want to manage it directly? What can we do once we start to manage it directly?
Exactly. So what we're going to do is emulate this process of navigation. We're going to provide to end users the knowledge they need that's been crowdsourced through a controlled process so all stakeholders can contribute. So there's kind of a library, but it's not really. These are units of knowledge that have been readied for reuse. And then there's this thing called an assessment control. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this guy because he's so happy. He's got a tool. An assessment control is a concept. It's the idea of that navigation app. It's a tool that processes the map tiles, the map, the cartography information that's been ready for reuse. So for us, that's an assessment control. Assessment control looks for context. So for this guy, he's working on this equipment here, or this design, or this validation. And that context then goes and retrieves based on the knowledge readied for reuse. And the knowledge then comes into the assessment control where it can be processed, managed, and data collected about how it gets used. So if we're not taking that right turn, we can tell the stakeholder who asked us to take that right turn, hey, people are not taking this right turn, and improve the process so that the experience is better, so that when this guy learns something, he's more ready or more willing or even wanting to include his learning in this process.
Okay, so once we transform the library into these knowledge packets, the assessment control allows us to sense context, deliver the right ones, collects data. But we've been talking a lot about, engineering or manufacturing specific workflows. It's not necessarily specific to those types of use cases, right? We use the software internally to do a lot of different things. We don't actually engineer or physically produce any products. So I guess talk a little bit about how it's definitely something that's valuable in engineering, but it's not necessarily specific to it.
Right. The gamut, the spectrum of use case is quite broad to anywhere where knowledge application produces better results. We use it, as you know, but I'll enumerate for the people listening in the cast. We use it for our hiring, right? All our methods and standard practices for hiring people, extremely useful there. We use it for our software factory, so where we want to follow process and engage actors at different parts of the process, extremely useful there. We use it for content planning of our software. We use it for our consulting projects, similar to our software factory process. Yep. I mean, where don't we use it, right?
Yeah, we use it in all sorts of different areas.
Yeah, so it's a good point. It's not really engineering specific, but that's kind of what we're talking about mostly today. So let's go ahead and move on now. And let's talk about, and it kind of dovetails with the idea that it's not engineering specific, and that this technique of knowledge aware is an enterprise solution that we've got experience in showing that it unifies multiple silos as a general capability of communicating knowledge. So whether you're in product development or you're in quality or you're in supply chain, really anything. If you're in business process or sales, I would suggest this also works. And by having a common technique for capturing, sharing, and reusing knowledge, we can do a much better job and learn and share in ways that weren't possible in the siloed world.
Okay, so now we know from a conceptual perspective kind of how we can accomplish these things, but let's talk a little bit more about the details. So we know that we use assessments and we use knowledge packets, that it's something can be used across the organization. We're not a manufacturing organization. We use the software. Get into a little bit more detail about the actual fundamentals of the software.
Okay, so to do that, we're going to explore this area called fundamentals. We've talked about two words so far. We talked about the words knowledge packet and assessment control. And to get into the practicality of how this approach works, we need to explore those a little bit in more detail.
Right.
So I'm going to reverse the order. In the big picture, we talked about knowledge packet first and then assessment control. I'm going to switch that. So the first thing we're going to talk about is this idea of an assessment control. So if you recall, the assessment control, the analog in the metaphor of navigation it's the nav app. It's taking in knowledge ready for reuse and presenting it to the user in a way that makes sense or in a way that improves what that user is doing, right? And so let's just look at a couple screenshots real quick because we're going to do this in the demo we're going to do. It's an inventory of these knowledge items, these units of knowledge that are granular, that are actionable, that have been ready for reuse, that have been crowdsourced, controlled crowdsourced across the organization and provisioned based on the context of a project. So this assessment control is a listing of these knowledge items, and then they're being processed by the knowledge by the assessment control. right? And so this is one view. A parameter view then is a view that gets into deeper interactions with those units of knowledge. And when the knowledge is process-oriented, it can be a process view with timing and logical dispensation of method. It's just a different view. So, Josh, here, we're not intending to get too far in this, just introduce the concept of the assessment control itself, give someone a brief visual cue of what it looks like, and we'll look at it in more detail in the demo.
Right. Yeah, this is going to be the cast, the essential cast, I guess, that everything kind of builds off of. So we want to go into enough detail that people understand, but we're not going to go deep into detail. We will have multiple casts that come and follow this that will go into a number of different details within the software.
So again, now we've talked about the assessment control, which is that nav app, but it's using these unitized bits of knowledge ready for reuse. Again, our picture for that is this JAX. They have these little things that show the motion. These are the things that flow into the nav app, the assessment control, as they're needed based on context. And they can look very different, right? There's a certain wickiness to a knowledge packet, but the knowledge packet has been purpose-built to capture knowledge in a way that wikis haven't, but there's a certain amount of commonality in the way it looks. They're units and categorized, and they can be a knowledge model. So they can look like this, they can look like this, and there's a variety of other different ways they can look depending on the types of knowledge. And then the assessment control understands those core structures and is able to help the user apply, and then it gathers the data and produces the insights about how knowledge is getting applied, right?
Yeah, so one of the things we talk about with knowledge packets a lot is the visual digestion of the information. So people can capture information in a Word document or a PowerPoint file or PDFs, or there's a number of spreadsheets, all sorts of different ways. The knowledge packet kind of gives you a visual representation that's going to be consistent across communities or across groups.
Across authors.
Right, across authors.
Across the same author on different days.
Right.
Because we see it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you can take one concept, whisper it in the ear of 5 people, and tell them to go communicate to others, and you'll get 5 different ways it's communicated. But the unitized structure of a knowledge packet will produce a common way. And once that's understood by reusers, it becomes very easy to digest, to assimilate what the author's saying.
Right.
And we're not even getting into the modeling part, which definitely is cast number 3 or something like that, when the knowledge modeling becomes really important. Okay, so what people most want to understand, and we believe that the most effective way to understand this concept is with this brief, simple demo that we're going to do.
Right.
Right? Okay, so here we go. This is the Auros landing page, right? And we can start our demo from here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my assessments. So we said the assessment control is like the nav app. So this will list the assessments that I've been working on. These are like trips that are being taken in a nav app. So I've got a trip I'm taking right here that's in progress, and I can see it's mostly we haven't traveled all the way yet. And I'm going to open up that assessment control. So this is an assessment control where it understands a little bit about context. We're not going to get into that too much right here, but a series of knowledge packets have been provisioned here, each represented by a row in the assessment. And now this assessment control is going to help me apply and track what happens to the knowledge as it gets applied, right? So we can do something very simple like say pass. And by saying pass, the act is recorded. It's that the status is being communicated to others, and we're gathering the data about that so that we can start to understand how knowledge is getting applied. That's the simplest thing, right? But let's kind of back up a little bit and start to understand more how this is like the navigation.
So there's value in what we just did.
Yeah.
We don't want to say there isn't value. We have a lot of people, they're using checklists, they're doing things that are similar to this. They don't have the ability that we're about to go into. There's value there, but there's not as much value as we can unlock in what we're about to show.
Right. So now let's talk about what here it just looks like a static checklist.
Right.
But granted, with history and communication and notification, all those things. But what we really want to show is how the content is dynamic. How does it mimic navigation? How are new knowledge packets provisioned? how every time the assessment is created for a specific context, does it get the right stuff?
Yeah.
So let's kind of have the use case that this trip is happening, but a learning happens while this trip, this assessment is in process. Right? So let's simulate that. So let's close this assessment window, and let's go back to our landing page, and let's put on our hat of someone who just learned something new.
So I'm working on a project. Someone who's working on
a different project somewhere else.
Yeah, someone who's working on a similar project somewhere else. They learned something, and they're now coming here, and they're about to capture or author what they learned.
They had a great experience using assessments, and they want to contribute. They want to get measured that they got contributed. They got that incentive, but let's just see how that works. So I'm going to go to my knowledge packet tile on the Auros landing page here and say Create New. I'm going to select a community to put it into. Here we have a knowledge template. We selected the template, and now we've got a structure to answer the questions to flesh out knowledge. I don't have to be an expert on what I need to put in here because this template is kind of walk me through. Now, granted, this is going to be the simplest template. So it's asking me for a title. So I'll go ahead and start putting in new knowledge.
So we learned something somewhere, and now we're coming here to capture it.
Yeah, and I'm just going to be purposely very simple here. It asks me for a description. So here I can put a more full description of the knowledge that I want to convey. And it's got, I need a spell check. It's got the full ability to add formatting and such. So I'm going to say that. And full ability, say, to add and annotate. Here I'm going to just quickly add an image. And I'm going to answer some questions about this knowledge I'm adding. For example, what category is it in? What domain classification is it in? And maybe an enterprise structure code. So I'll pick maybe Zone 2, Node 2, and Node 1. Apply. Granted, this is a very simple example, but it's meant just to show how the knowledge can get captured in a template form. We're bypassing the review, the potential review, approval, all of these controlled crowdsource settings just to show how this works in terms of provisioning of knowledge. So it took us just a few seconds to capture a unit of knowledge, right? And it's going to be very similar from author to author. Now we're going to go back to our smart tiles. And I'm going to go back to my activity. You can see the knowledge packet I just created. But I'm going to open up the assessment control, the trip that we're working on previously. And what you see is that in the upper left-hand corner, the assessment control is alerting me that there's a new turn to take. There's a new knowledge element. There's a new lesson, a new standard, a new do-don't, a new consideration. And if I click on this, here's the new learning we just created. And based on the context of this assessment, Auros has said, hey, this learning applies to your trip. Here's a new turn to consider. I'm going to go ahead and accept that into my trip. And it's been added to the bottom of the assessment. It can be added anywhere in the assessment. And if I open up, I get the full knowledge packet with all its annotations, data, usage, health characteristic.
So let's make sure that people are following what just happened. So our assessment control is sensing context for the project or the trip that we're working on.
It has a destination, right?
Right. So then when we go to create knowledge or another user goes to create knowledge, they're answering questions about that knowledge based on the answers to those questions, the categories, the structures, all that stuff that we filled in. The contents then senses that there's new knowledge that fits our context, and it then brings that knowledge to us or delivers it to us.
Provisions it correctly, right. So as you know, Auros has this really cool system of metadata and merging of metadata. Advanced topic for here. Here we saw the results of that, but Auros does a great job of being able to merge metadata to create accurate provisioning so that the assessment controls have the precise content for the trip. And by trip, I mean the trip is the analog in the navigation, but for an engineering project or a project, it might be the project type, it may be the customer, it may be all of the things. It might be the date, it could be all these things. These are the contexts that would cause just the right knowledge elements, these knowledge packets, to show up in any given assessment control.
Right, but it's not just delivering it because it's new. It's delivering it because it's new and it fits the context of what we're doing.
Exactly. In the same way that Google Maps navigation wouldn't give you a turn that's on a completely different route, it's only giving you the turns that are on your route.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about how the assessment control gathers data and produces insights. There's many different ways. We're just going to talk about one right now. And so let's have the hypothetical scenario that we're evaluating the next knowledge packet. We're interacting with that knowledge packet, and we're having difficulties, right? So what we want to do is we want to make the data from these past usage. Other people have traveled this journey. They didn't take the right turn, or they did take the right turn. We're having trouble making that right turn. So what we want to be able to do is use that data to produce an insight. So I'm going to open up the knowledge packet and examine the turns that have been taken when this turn was suggested. And I keep using the metaphor of turns, but the idea is it's a knowledge packet with some kind of direction.
Right, so someone's struggling and they want to know how to potentially solve the problem that they're having, and they can come here and see how other people have applied this piece of knowledge in the past.
Exactly. So here we have, when this turn has been suggested, here's another project, another assessment that suggested this turn. It wasn't taken. What's going on? Let's see what they did. Let's see what evidence they've attached or what analysis they had, and we now instantly have the data that what they did, what values they used, what they explored, whether they took the turn or not ultimately, right? And so, now granted, there's a lot more we do with this data than just showing it this way. We can produce higher level insights like, is this turn a good turn? Should we be pulling this turn out from circulation, right? Those kinds of things. But here you see that this is a tremendous advantage. Customers call this look across, that because we're understand the specific knowledge element and we're managing that knowledge element, we can very easily connect to where others have tried to make that turn, to assimilate, to apply that piece of knowledge.
Right, so this term look across comes from you're now looking across all of the times that this piece of knowledge was applied.
Yep. And by understanding how the problems were solved in the past, it's much easier for us to evaluate the process and to continue on our journey without wasting a lot of time reinventing or reanalyzing what's already understood or learned by another team. And that's kind of the goal of Knowledge Aware. So before we finish off, maybe we can talk a little bit about for people who are just coming to understand the basics of this approach. When is it good to use this approach? I mean, we talked a little bit about it at the beginning. What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, we talked a lot about, or I guess maybe a little bit in the beginning, about how we're evangelists of this process. We really believe that Knowledge Aware is the wave of the future. So we use it internally. And an easy rule of thumb, and this isn't black and white necessarily, but if you have a checklist that you use and people struggle to use, or if you have recurring mistakes, so you see things continuously happen over and over that cause problems within your organization, if you have standard processes, those are all things that, if those are experiences that you go through, Knowledge Aware is something that we believe can benefit your organization.
Excellent. Thanks, Josh.
Okay, so to recap our learning points, we started with the big picture where we introduced the navigation metaphor. We then moved into the fundamental technologies, the knowledge packet and the assessment control. And we wrapped up with a demonstration where we saw how knowledge can be provisioned into the flow of work or into the assessment control, and then how we can use the assessment control to gather insights and provide them back to end users. Thanks for joining us on the Auros Playbook. For more information, visit our website, auroscast.com. Additional casts can be found on the resources page. And as always, you can follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and our YouTube channel. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.